Hello, my friends. Today we're going to be talking about shame, understanding what it is, why it exists, and the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. So, shame is essentially this core identity or felt sense that who we are is somehow wrong, bad, flawed, and so on. And it's a sort of a heavy weight or a burden, a physiological burden. You can feel it in your body. You know, when you start feeling that shame, it's a really heavy, dense feeling that's incredibly painful. And it also really affects how you experience life and the world and yourself and other people. Because when we carry this burden of shame, you know, we behave as if we are bad and wrong. You know, we might not go for that job position because we feel ashamed. We might not go talk to those people we want to go talk to or engage with them because we feel like they're going to respond badly. Because we kind of tend to, if we feel this shame here, we tend to assume that others can see it or will see it if we engage with them. So we tend to live very small. You know, if you feel into shame, it's always got this sense of wanting to get small and hide and withdraw, right? Which makes it very difficult to really fully be ourselves. So why does it exist? There is a very good reason for why it exists. Its function is to keep you in connection with the tribe. So as a human being, your deepest fear, or certainly one of them, is to be disconnected from your tribe, because up until very recently, you know, in our tribal history, that would have meant almost certain death. If you get isolated and cast out, you're doomed. And that we still carry that fear within us today, deep down. And so when you're growing up, the function of shame is to sort of mold you a little bit, mold your behavior so you stay, you know, more or less in alignment with the expectation and mores and rules of the society you find yourself in. So as a toddler, for example, say you pull the cat's tail or you poke your sibling in the eye, your caregiver might come up and say, hey, you can't do that. And you might get a flash of shame that's communicating to you, hey, you're running the risk of being disconnected and being out of alignment with the tribe. So, you know, you might want to think twice about doing that again. And that's why shame is painful, because that's what brings you back in. In this sense, it's actually very, very helpful. If you don't have that shame function coming in, if you don't develop to an attunement to what's acceptable and not acceptable, you know, you end up like this. You know some people who might be very, very misattuned to their surroundings. They're quite, you know, we call them shameless because they act in ways that we find very inappropriate without any seeming self-awareness. And this is not a helpful or a good way to go through life. I think it causes them a lot of problems because they run into a lot of conflict that they don't understand where it's coming from. So this is very helpful for our development to keep us in connection. That's sort of healthy shame, but let's get into the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. This healthy shame that helps our development tends to be momentary, and it tends to be about a particular behavior or action or event. So, you know, we might feel a flash of shame about pulling the cat's tail or, you know, poking our sibling in the eye, to use these examples. But it's not about who we are as a whole, right? So it's not something we kind of start to carry with us. And when it's healthy, often we have the support and the capacity to feel the shame. Hopefully your caregiver or parent is not being mean or abusive in any way. They're saying, hey, you can't do that. But they're being very supportive when that happens. And that helps you to regulate that shame. So you feel it momentarily, but you process it because you feel safe. It doesn't feel unsafe. There's just that momentary flash of shame saying, hey, you got to come back in alignment. The key thing is then that you don't carry with it the rest of your life, and it doesn't feel like it's about you. Toxic shame, on the other hand, is precisely that. It feels like it's an absolute identity. That's who you are, right? I am bad. I haven't done something that is bad. I fundamentally am bad. And that tends to latch onto or project onto anything and everything you do. If I am bad, you know, if I do a painting, you know, we'll be ashamed, oh, it's bad. If I run a workshop, we'll have a sense, okay, that's bad. Or the clothes I wear, it just gloms onto whatever it is you do, which is what makes it so difficult. And the reason that happens is because when you feel those initial bits of shame, when you're, you know, attempted to be brought in alignment by the people in your life, they're doing it in a way that isn't safe and supportive. So maybe they're getting angry at you or aggressive or abusive. And that means that as a little child, we don't have the capacity to process that shame. So we just sit in that shame, and we have to kind of push it away. It's too much to bear, so we have to numb out and dissociate from it in various ways, which I'm not going to get into here. But the basic idea is that we don't process that shame. It sort of stays with us. We hold it in our body. And then as those experiences repeat themselves, or we come into similar experiences where we're not held or don't feel safe to be, we aren't held in that bringing back into alignment, we will build that shame. That shame will keep trying to come up, will intensify, and then be pushed back down again. And then every little moment in life where you feel a little embarrassed or ashamed, it'll sort of build up that trauma loop. Until before you know it, you're carrying a really dense, heavy weight of shame around with you. And that's when it starts to develop into this sort of permanent identity. And that is the toxic shame, where it feels like it's like a filter through which you experience yourself and the world, which has sort of seemingly come out of nowhere, and it just feels completely real, like that's actually your experience of life. The cost to shame, because it is, it's trying to keep you in connection. In fact, before I get into this, there's one more thing to say about toxic shame. It actually starts becoming very dysfunctional, because the purpose of shame is to bring you into connection with those around you. But when you start to feel that a certain weight of shame as that burden, you start to isolate yourself. You start to need or want to disconnect yourself from people, to disconnect and disengage from the tribe and from life, because it feels too dangerous and too painful to engage, because you assume that something negative is going to happen, it feels too painful that someone might see you, or might, you might feel like you might be exposed. And so actually, paradoxically, you start disconnecting yourself from the tribe almost preemptively. And so it's having the opposite intended function of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to bring you into connection. That's what healthy shame does. And that toxic shame is actually making you, because it's so painful, so heavy, making you disconnect more and more. Another way of thinking about shame is that it inhibits your self-expression. This is the function. This is how it works. It inhibits your self-expression. So any part of you that might want to be expressed or come to the surface. It could be an emotion like anger or sadness, tears. It could be an opinion, I love that film, I like that music. It could be a behavior wanting to dance or sing. It could just be your joyousness. It could just be you being silly. If it feels like these are somehow unsafe, they're not going to be, they're not going to be well received, that people will think you're weird or that they won't like it in some way, shame is what makes us shut those down. In this way, we start becoming disconnected from ourselves. And we start becoming inauthentic, because we shut down our authentic expression and we start presenting to the world more acceptable versions of ourselves that aren't real, though. They're just a mask, a device to be accepted. So instead of saying, I really love vanilla ice cream, you might say, actually, I hate vanilla, I love chocolate, because you know that everyone around you is going to, they like chocolate too. And so you're going to fit in with the group. And in this way, step by step, you start disowning and disconnecting from yourself, which is an excruciating way to be. Continuously monitoring yourself, having to shut away certain parts and having to, exhaustingly present fake versions of yourself to the world. This is a really exhausting and painful way to go through life. And so many of us are in this state to lesser or greater degrees. And, for that, I have so much empathy and sympathy for the human condition, of how much shame we have to go through. It's incredibly difficult. But that's the cost of connection. That's why that shows just how important connection is to us, that we will endure so much pain just to stay in connection. So I think that'll do for the time being. Future videos coming out very soon or already on this channel will address how we start to heal the burden of shame. How can we actually work with it and relieve ourselves so we can start to connect to ourselves again and feel safe to be authentic. Because there's, nowadays we're in a completely different situation for when you grew up. Likely you're able to be much more authentic and open than, when you were a child, because you're an adult now, you're surrounded by adults, you can choose who you hang out with. But our nervous system still believes and holds on to those beliefs from childhood that it's not safe to be who we are. And so we've got to learn to work with the nervous system to unwind that sense of, okay, it's not safe to be who I am, I'm going to be rejected and isolated. Here's a few questions you can start to ask yourself to start to connect to that sense of shame and understand it better in yourself. Just sit down and close your eyes and just take some time to contemplate these. I'll say these quite quickly, but you can just pause this video and take, as much time as you want to contemplate each one. The first question is, which aspects of yourself do you hide because of shame? The second one is, how does hiding these aspects of you keep you in connection with others? A third is, how does your shame help you to belong to your group, tribe, or society? Lastly, what is the cost to you of maintaining this connection and belonging? What does it cost you? Okay. Hope that helps. I do support people one-on-one to feel their feelings. I offer somatic therapy sessions, which can help us to heal these emotional wounds. So check out my website below or the links to get in touch with me. Bye.